Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Samuel Chu. I'm the president of the Campaign for Hong Kong. I'm going to introduce my co-host here in a second, but I want to just give some instructions and welcome everybody who's coming onto the live stream. If not already, it should be streaming from a number of different platforms. If you're joining us from YouTube or from Twitter or from Facebook, we are happy to have you. We're going to give a few minutes, just a quick moment for people to join in. You are joining our 2022 Human Rights Press Awards event called Freedom of the Press Will Not Be Canceled. We are very happy for all of you to be here, and we have a long list of distinguished and really respected reporters, former reporters, Hong Kongers, and folks who write and cover human rights, not just in Hong Kong, but in the region of Asia, to come together to honor this year's reported winners of the Human Rights Press Awards as after its cancellation by the Foreign Correspondent Club in Hong Kong. So before, again, I go into the formal kind of start here, I just want to make sure that folks have an opportunity to come on and get their live stream working. You have come on to the 2022 Human Rights Press Awards hosted by the Campaign for Hong Kong. My name is Samuel Chu. Let me introduce my co-conspirator for today, and Jillian K. Melchior, who's the editorial writer at the Wall Street Journal. Hi, Jillian.
Hi, how's it going?
Pretty good. Thank you so much for joining me. And I, as I mentioned to you, I think before we came on, that it's been such a boost, both emotionally and really, I think, publicly and politically, to have I think the clear and powerful words of both the reporters and the editorial staff at the Wall Street Journal in documenting what's been happening in Hong Kong. And so it's a pleasure to have you. You yourself have written extensively on Hong Kong, on China, and on human rights. And so it's an honor to have you join us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think this is so important to do. Clearly, the Hong Kong government and Chinese authorities are intimidated by what the press's truth-telling says about their regime. They've certainly tried to silence these awards, and I think that makes them more important than ever to promote and to get at the heart of what these stories say.
So we seem to be having some issues in terms of the Facebook side. So I think we're going to get started. For those of you who might be trying to, actually, I guess that you won't be able to see it if you're from Facebook, but we are going to make sure that the other links are up and running, and we're able to have you view it as much as possible. If you're trying to get onto Facebook or from another platform, make sure that our YouTube and our Twitter live stream is now working and up and running. So we're going to jump right into it here. Again, my name is Samuel Chu. I'm here with Jillian K. Melchior from Wall Street Journal. We are here, in a way, we shouldn't have to be here today. On April 25th, the president of the Hong Kong Foreign Correspondent Club wrote a note to its members saying that after a board meeting, the FCC have decided to suspend their prestigious annual Human Rights Press Award for this year, despite the fact that they have opened the process, accepted submissions, and the judges for this year's awards have actually gone through the whole process of judging and have selected winners for the categories. When the FCC board purportedly met a few days before, they were deciding and eventually voted to suspend the award based on the reasoning that they do not know where the red line for journalism and reporting might be under this current national security law environment in Hong Kong, and that they have chosen to avoid and essentially self-censor themselves by suspending the awards for the very first time in 26 years. And so we are here today to put this year's awards, the winners, the stories, and what happened in its cancellation on the record. And we're very happy to be able to honor the winners, the list of folks who have reported under extremely difficult circumstances, not only in Hong Kong, but around Asia. And to also have a discussion with some of the folks who have been involved in this awards and the process this year to document what exactly happened and to make sure that we continue to highlight and defend the freedom of the press, human rights, and the hopeful voices and the incredible work of journalists on the ground in different cities and countries that continues to suffer from direct assault, not only on press freedom, but on human rights. So I want to, Jillian, I want you to bring you in here and talk a little bit about why this particular moment in Hong Kong and this cancellation of the Human Rights Press Award is so significant and really so sad for so many of us.
Yeah, well, I think it begins with the passage of the national security law. And what that was, it was imposed by Beijing. And the intention of this law is to chill and outlaw dissent and criticism of the government. And it does so expansively. It claims both authority in Hong Kong and these sweeping extraterritorial claims to shut down speech abroad. But it's also very ambiguous. And so I think what we've seen China do in the last year, the Communist Party do in the last year, is make a couple examples in Hong Kong. And that includes Apple Daily and Jimmy Lai, its founder, who is now in jail, facing up to life in prison on national security charges. But I think one of the really intimidating and chilling things about what we've seen happen in Hong Kong is you've got these high-profile examples, but that sends a message to the rest of the reporters in Hong Kong that if they speak out, if they criticize the government, that they can be next. And those lines are not clear, they're ambiguous. We also see in the national security law that it talks about extraterritorial claims, that it claims that it can go to media companies and demand that they cooperate with investigations into speech that they claim jeopardizes national security. Now, the lines on that are also ambiguous. Does that mean that they could hand over your emails and your correspondence? We don't know. But they have also said that they can demand that speech is taken down, and we've seen efforts of them trying to do that. And so I think what we're seeing with the Foreign Correspondents Club is a realization of that reality, of the threats and the environment that they are operating in Hong Kong is no longer safe, that those lines aren't there. But the broader effort to penalize and chill speech is there, and it's intimidating, and the consequences are real. And so I think that it is up to the international community to not accept this, not accept what's happening in Hong Kong and put it on the record, but also not accept these extraterritorial claims that are intended at chilling speech, chilling journalism abroad. So I think that brings us to where we are today.
That's right, Julian. And I think it's really important to note that we're doing this, stepping up to fill the gap in recording and documenting this year's awards, but that none of the reporters and journalists who worked on the stories that were recognized, who are currently in Hong Kong, who might not even be practicing journalism anymore, or who plans to be in Hong Kong, or who works or have colleagues or families in Hong Kong, none of them are publicly present today because of that terror that you're talking about, because of the risk that the government have now imposed on the simple mission of the work of reporters that journalists used to be able to do freely, without fear, without risk of being detained and jailed in Hong Kong right up until this past year. And we want to give space, even though they cannot be here themselves and show their faces and be recognized personally. We want to recognize what they have done. And so many of them have lost their jobs. Not only are they not able to do their job, but they're not able to share and speak freely, even as individuals in this moment. So with that, I want to actually begin by inviting on to our program Law Yanwei, who is a veteran reporter and broadcaster in Hong Kong. She has also produced a documentary called Vanishing Archives, which documents the 1967 riots in Hong Kong, which is I highly recommend. It talks about the 67 riots being one of the starting point of the consciousness of Hong Kongers and Hong Kong identity. And so she was also one of the judges that were involved in this year's Human Rights Press Awards. And after the announcement, the judges and 8 members of the Press Freedom Committee, as well as 1 member of the Foreign Correspondent Club board, resigned in protest. And I am so honored and privileged to have Loy Wei with us today to put on the record what happened this year. Welcome.
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is my 5th year to work with my team being a judge, and before I'm only working for the investigative feature writing. But this year we just as normal we will receive the invitation, and then we start to work. The letter for the invitation is from January the 11th, and then we start to work like on the 28th. That is, I have been told that we have less judges than before, and the reason that everybody can really easy to understand, because I remember there are some judges like Margaret Ng, and there are another, the name is Feng Wai Guang, which is the chief editor of Apple Daily English version. So they can't join. So I take part in 4 group of the entries, namely is the investigative feature writing, short video, documentary, and also multimedia. So we just I see the team member is really represented in their field. It is which is presentable and also can be represent different voices. And as usual, we have spent a long time during the 1 month being the judges. And this year is more emotional because most of the entries are because of the Apple Daily, they following, and then of the civic groups like 47, they just follow in short time. There are many stories like that, quite focused on a few topics. And this year is quite strange because in the previous experiences, we have so many entries from different news organizations. But this year, like there is a media always covering in-depth reporting in China and other places. The name is Intipen, Duan Quanmei. There is no entry at all. And then Apple Daily, they're not here. And the Fact Wire news agency, we can't see any entries. And normally we will have manpower, and Hong Kong 01, they have more manpower to do the investigative. But this year we can apparently not. Maybe the manpower is not there. So we have so many entries that can come to the final, semi-final is from the Stand News, the Citizen News, and the reporter from Taiwan. So it is not a normal like before. We have so many competitors,
Yeah.
but just a few. What I really want to highlight is that although the choices from the news agency is not much as before, but the quality is really so high, so top. Because if we look back for the history from last 9 months, before the Stand News were the chief editor being caught and then they closed down, there are so many quality stories in the past 6 months before they closed down. And then they are reporter. I remember before the uh, uh, 2019 movement, there are only like 15 reporters in the Stand News. But now, before they close down, they have 60 something. So, which is in other organizations, like I work for a few TV stations in Hong Kong. I also work in Canada. Uh, you have never come across with a team like 10 reporters doing one report for 2 to 3 months. It never happened in Hong Kong. But they have several productions is working in this way. Like the prize for the investigative feature writing. The first prize is Nama Shipwreck and Death Investigation Report. They have 10 reporters working for a long time, study more than 2,000 sheets of the report of that report. And then they have video, they have all sides, the investigative. That is never happened in Hong Kong before, I would say, for a purely for one news organization.
So if I can jump in, right here, and I think that what strikes me is that you went through this process before and have done it, and you talk about the lack of, some of the judges have been jailed from previous years. Outlet has shut down. People are afraid to submit stories. Did you ever think in the process that they would cancel or suspend the awards completely before it happened?
No. I think we never come across with this idea because when Hong Kong JA is not participating, and FCC, the one who coordinated with us, is very responsible. I always ask questions like, "Oh, I can't find the link. The link is fake." For example, as G, which is a small one, and then we can see the highlight like many of the submission. They will say that my organization has been closed down. I submit by myself. So the never happened before because we won't accept the entries like that. But this year is abnormal. So we work hard as usual, as before, and we debate as usual. And maybe you can recognize that one of the judge is Alan Au, who is helping Stan News, uh, the executive producer of some production. He is so professional that he would tell us that he didn't give the marks. Any item that he joined, he won't take a mark. And then at the panel, he would tell us that what is the problem of this one or that one that maybe he knows. He would fully tell us what we should take care about, and then we debate as usual. So I think that from the process, we are working really hard. We believe that this is maybe the last time we do it for Hong Kong, because only FEC is there, and then the quality of reporting is all disappear already. So we think that maybe this is the last time. So we are being so serious. And then when we got the news from the SEC, FCC is only announced from the president. We know it from the news. So everyone is so angry. We think that we are really not being respected, and then really ridiculous. And this is purely the result. There are 9 prize for the Star News. There are 5 for the Citizen News. I think this is just like I explained before. This is what happened because there are not many entries from other organizations. There is no Apple Daily. There are no quality from other submission. So this is the result. And then and just telling us that because of the stand news and because from 4 groups I joined, and I checked the list. Oh yes, there are many stand news submission. And they got most of the prize and also the citizen news. So and we sort of can't speed up because everyone is in Hong Kong, most of us, and then the voice is not strong enough to recognize what had happened. Because as a former winner,
I want to intervene there because I know we've got some viewers who are not based in Hong Kong. And I think what you're saying is so important. I want to make sure they have the context to understand what you're saying. So let's just stop for a minute and talk about what happened to Apple Daily and to Stand News. What we've seen in the last year is that the Hong Kong government, citing the national security law, has gone after these publications, arrested their executives, arrested their journalists, seized their computers, seized their notes and materials without any due process, and has effectively forced both of these publications to shut down entirely, with the threat to their journalists and the threat to other journalists that the same thing might happen to them if they criticize the government. So when you're talking about the quality of submissions this year in this chilling environment, I think that's so important to note that this is happening in an environment where the basic rights that Hong Kongers were promised under basic law, under the Sino-British Joint Declaration, have been completely suppressed and completely shut down, and that is the environment in which the FCC is making that decision, and that's the environment in which you're getting these submissions from reporters that have had the courage to continue to report despite that extraordinary threat.
Yes,
exactly. I want to give close with two-part questions. I think one is I think you already talked about this. We are. Alan, who was recently arrested, even though he was granted bail, this is happening in real time, that reporters, journalists, media executives are being arrested and detained. According to our record and working with the Committee for Protected Journalists report, that there are currently 10 journalists who are behind bars in Hong Kong who have been denied bail, who are awaiting trial or have already been tried. That's unimaginable even just a year ago. And so, but what you also talk about here is that it's very important to understand that this is actually not an issue of government stepping in to directly censor news. This is an environment in which that a private organization, a journalistic organization and association, decided themselves to censor, despite not having a direct intervention from the government. So I think that's really, I think, a nuance that is important to point out. And so I want to just ask you two things. One is, will we ever have this kind of recognition and the Human Rights Press Awards? I know that other awards have been canceled in Hong Kong. You talk about the fact that you had the feeling that this might be the last year that you guys were doing this. The second is that what would you want to say to the Stand News and Citizen News and even Apple Daily journalists who are no longer now practicing their profession in Hong Kong?
There are a few Apple Daily reporter, a senior one. They are still working independently. Some didn't have a page one. One did. They still have the quality reporting, but we know that they are in danger. I think if they can submit their articles by themselves, they will be the winner. I've heard from some core who working with Stand News, that their chief editor, both Zhong Pui-Kun and then Patrick Lam, they know the danger before being shut down. Uh, uh, like 6 months before, there are so many stories that is going so deep that the police in Hong Kong really being very angry, but they keep going to support their reporter to do the profile. Um, I think there are no more organizations like that. No resources, and then many of the journalists is going to do other work, going to studies. There was one story that one senior reporter from Apple Daily, they moved to the Star News. They're working in McDonald's. Of course, it's a temporary job. There's so many floating. The Star News really got the floating like a platform. A team from RTHK, they produced the 7-1, the Yunnan tragedy, the incident. And then one of got the prize for multimedia is a very senior, the editor from the Ming Pao Weekly. So she is doing a story of what happened in 1989. The big story, a team of her working on it. I think it will never happen again because they are doing like 2 to 3 months, a big team doing in every single angle that they can cover. And also the 721, the Yunnan incident, they have a big team to do it, not really a big team, do it, check everything that they can source out. They can find 200, more than 200 people who are on location. The police didn't just get in touch with them. I think this kind of quality we don't think would happen in Hong Kong again. And quite a few of the journalists, they moved to the UK. They start a small channel. They want to covering Hong Kong. But because of the distance and because of the resources, so that would be a really great difference, just like mainland maybe, mainland China.
Well, thank you, and I want to just thank again for what your work and obviously your willingness to come on today to talk a little bit about what has happened to the awards, and I want to just thank you again, Loy Wai, who's former broadcasters, reporters in Hong Kong. Also the producer of the documentary Vanishing Archives, who records and talks about the 1967 riots in Hong Kong. I want to point out, and we want to point you to a webpage on our website that has all the winners and awards and merit winners for this year's awards. We have put them up, display, and link to, if we can find it, either a live version or a archive version on the website, so that you can go and check it out and read it, watch the video. But thank you again so much, Lauren White, for joining us today. So I want to move on here, and I think Jillian, you talk about this. It's really important for people who are not necessarily tracking it that this has been happening, and that in a way this really caps a 2-year-long campaign to shut down completely the whole sector of independent press in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So just to give people who aren't from Hong Kong or haven't been following it context, if you look at Hong Kong Basic Law, if you look at the Sino-British Joint Declaration, what it guarantees Hong Kongers is that their freedoms will remain untouched, that they will be able to exercise not only freedom of speech, not only freedom of the press, but freedom of assembly, freedom of worship, all of those basic and fundamental rights. And they're actually written into the law. But what we're seeing now is Beijing imposing a national security law that claims to supersede those legal promises, violates not only basic law, but the international commitments that it made under the Sino-British Joint Declaration. an attempt to shut down and suppress anything that is critical of the government. And so press is one component of that. But we've also seen the crackdown on Hong Kongers who are trying to commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre. We've seen the dismantling of a statue on a Hong Kong campus to the martyrs of the Tiananmen Square massacre. We've seen, crackdowns on what you're able to sing, what you're able to say, how you're able to assemble. Some of this has been done under COVID, but much more of it has been done under the threat of going after you with the national security law. And under that legislation, the maximum sentence is life in prison. So that's a real chilling effect. And I think what is quite remarkable is how many Hong Kongers have continued to show exceptional courage in the face of a threat like that and to stand up for their rights. What is scary is to see that the government has become more and more repressive and more assertive in its ability to shut down speech.
So I want to welcome in our next group. Again, we recognize that since nobody in Hong Kong right now and who are part of some of these stories that were recognized can be with us, we are grateful that a number of veteran, seasoned, former reporters in Hong Kong and some who are freelance reporter right now can join us to give voices to really those who are not able to speak right now publicly. So it's my pleasure to welcome first Steve Vines, who for over 35 years was a broadcaster in Hong Kong, most recently at RTHK as an anchor. And he recently, at the end of last year, left Hong Kong, a place that he, I think, once said he will never leave. And he is now joining us from the UK. I also want to welcome Ching Chong, who many of you are familiar with, a longtime reporters in Hong Kong, used to be the senior reporters for the Straits Times. He was detained and arrested and then sentenced to jail by the Chinese authorities back in 2005. And so he knows firsthand what is unfolding in Hong Kong and what the playbook has been for the Chinese government in suppressing a free press. And then I want to welcome Yun Chen, who is a former journalist who have reported a long time in Hong Kong and then in the region, but now a senior lecturer for journalism at the City University of London. Thank you for joining us. She recently wrote a compelling overview and op-ed in the Hong Kong Free Press, one of the remaining free independent outlet, documenting the assault of press freedom. And then finally, I want to welcome Chris Cheng, who is a freelance reporter who have worked extensively in Hong Kong. Many of you follow him on Twitter. He continues to break news from Hong Kong, even from afar. And he obviously worked closely with many of the reporters who can't be with us today from Stand News, from Citizen News. And I want to say that, Lo Yang-wei made a point that it seems like that the community have shrunk over the last few years. People, who moved from Apple Daily went to Stand News. People who were forced out of other outlets found a home in Stand News and Citizen News, and then eventually that were eliminated and destroyed as well. So I want to begin actually with Steve here. You said you would never leave Hong Kong, and that in some of your writing you've described that you would never imagine the closing of the space for free speech, free expression, and the press in Hong Kong as we witness it today. What would you say now as you think about where Hong Kong is at?
Well, thank you very much, Samuel, and thank you for inviting me, because I think this is an important occasion, because it honors people who've shown extreme courage and tremendous ability, incidentally, in their work. But to directly answer your question, yes, I had no intention of leaving Hong Kong until towards the end of last year. And I even believed that the concept of one country, two systems was a viable proposition. It wasn't going to be an ideal proposition, but a viable proposition, in as much as there would be space for a limited amount of freedom of expression, a limited amount of liberty. Not, of course, the kind of liberty that had been enjoyed in Hong Kong previously, even though Hong Kong has never enjoyed full democracy or anything approaching that. But, you know, with the introduction of the national security law, which after all was just the final nail in the coffin, it is necessary to say that these illusions have been shattered. My illusions, that of many other people. So, you know, that's why in the end I decided to leave. And I ought to say that, you know, we're marking an event that is personally embarrassing to me. I used to be president of the Foreign Correspondents Club. And I have to admit that I was a president at a time when issues of liberty were simply not on the agenda. We took it for granted. I was never looking over my shoulder saying, wow, goodness me, let's see who's on the list of people who've won a Human Rights Press Award. That could be dangerous for us. It simply did not occur to us. Now, I understand the pressures that the Foreign Correspondents Club is under these days. I understand that they're there and I'm not. I understand all these things. But I do think it's lamentable that the FCC has decided to withdraw its support from this very important award, not least because, you know, it wasn't just an award for Hong Kong. We should stress this. It was a recognition of the work of journalists all over Asia in very extreme circumstances, some of whom are award winners this year. Journalists working in Myanmar. In the past, we've been giving awards to people working in the Philippines under very, very difficult conditions indeed. And the point was that in Hong Kong, you had the liberty to recognize their work without threat. That has now disappeared. And both you, Samuel, and Gillian have referred to this business of red lines that are being drawn all over the place in Hong Kong. And the problem with these red lines is nobody really knows how far they go. So the FCC decided, out of an abundance of caution, you may say, that they thought the red line crossed over the awards under this scheme. I would only say that if anybody wanted to know more about where the red lines existed, they need to refer to a press conference with Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, over a year ago, in which she was asked, you talk about red lines that journalists shouldn't cross. Can you please tell us what they are? So, you know, at least we know the parameters of where we can operate. And she, obviously having read George Orwell's 1984 very carefully, gave an answer straight out of the Orwellian dystopia. And she said, you know where the red lines are. I don't need to tell you, just don't cross them. This is what authoritarian governments always do. They want fear, they want uncertainty, and ultimately they want punishment of people who challenge the authority of the state. And in this instance, the authority of the state is being challenged by people who believe in freedom of speech, as has been said before, something which is guaranteed in Hong Kong's mini constitution. So that's where we are today, and it's a very lamentable thing that we've got this deep into the mire, but we are where we are. And I know that, Samuel, you asked, you know, does that mean the end of these awards, the end of the ability to have a free press in Hong Kong? I'm afraid to say it does mean it for the time being, but, you know, never is for never, never is forever. And I remain totally optimistic that this nightmare will pass.
Thank you, Steve. Let me bring in Chris. We'll come back to you, Steve, as well. That Chris, you and I have talked a little bit about this. So we know that Stand News were recognized in 9 different awards and merits, and then Citizen News, who's also been shuttered, has 5. What is so unique? You know, Loyang might talk a little bit about the evolution of how they've evolved into really sophisticated but also effective news outlets. But what made Stand News such a unique voice in Hong Kong, and what did we lose?
I think to talk about the uniqueness of Stand News, we have to think right now, looking back, what have we lost? And there's a report, interestingly, by student media at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, who interviewed some students. And the students said after these news outlets were gone, Apple Daily, Stand News, Citizen News, they lost a lot of interest in reading the news. Like every day in the past, they would go to these outlets, say Apple Daily or Stand News, to get what they read every day. It could be politics, it could be economy, it could be international news, it could be even entertainment. Apple Daily has an abundance of that, and sports. But with these outlets gone, um, there are no longer any sort of large scale platforms for people to just go there and read the news, that whatever news they want to read, and quality news. Sure, there are still quite a few independent news outlets in Hong Kong working very hard on whatever they're doing, but the scale and the level of product they're doing simply can't be compared to Apple Daily or Stand News, which has 800 people, or as Lauren White says, Stand News has 60 people. They could afford a few reporters, sometimes maybe 10 on one story. And when I looked at the supposed award for Stand News, there are a few that stood out to me. Say the one on the July 21st incident, an investigation on the mob attack on that day, and also on the lawyer I mentioned on the Lama Ferry incident. Uh, in fact, these are not exactly, if I can call it like that, these are not exactly stand news stories. These are stories that some of the veteran reporters have been doing in other outlets, and then for whatever reason, they have to move from those outlets into Stand News or to other places, and they continue the work on Stand News. So, Stand News, Apple Daily, or Citizen News, for some time they have been a sort of a safe haven for journalists to independently do the work without any fear. But now these platforms are gone. As Laura mentioned, also some reporters from Stand News, they were still working on some big stories. Where can they publish now? How can they continue the work? Will we ever see those stories come to light? That is the problem I think people are facing in Hong Kong. That the outlets they love are gone, and some of the stories in the making that should be out, we don't know when they will be out.
May I chip in?
Yes, please.
Well, I think Stand News and Citizen News stand out to be a very high quality news outlet for Hong Kong people. And I happen to be good friends of Tony Choi and Joseph Lim, who are both directors wanted by the authority, but were at large at the moment. Their coverage, and I would say, is characterized by their in-depth reportage, incentive analysis, and also very illustrative. I think Stan News is the pioneer in the Hong Kong media scene that adopt a very illustrative approach to explain difficult news concepts. And I think they all stand for a strong supporter of press freedom and their unrelenting criticism of the authority. And other than that, they exhibit high professional caliber with a lot of fact checking and also source attribution. So I think the reason why they became so annoying to the authority is because of their federalism. I think that is the two things that the authorities fear most.
So
Yeah.
I had a question for you. I guess any of our panelists can take this up. But when we're seeing what's happened to publications like Apple Daily and Stand News, where not only are they targeting speech, they're targeting assets without due process. A lot of what Hong Kong's journalists have covered in the past are financial stories. So what does this mean for the viability of Hong Kong as a business capital going forward, where if you question the government or if you run afoul of its politics somehow, that your assets can be seized and those fundamental property rights are also under threat?
Well, that's a good question. Many people said that the censorship is on political news only. But wait, we have already have incidents showing that equity analyst with a state bank in Hong Kong wrote a stock market analysis quite critical of the performance of the A share market in Hong Kong. And finally, this analyst has to go. He's fired by the state bank. So that is already an alarm showing that even writing on economic information may not be 100% safe. Now, we have also seen similar things happening in the mainland China as well. Recently, there was a big brokerage firm in China putting out an analysis of the economic situation in China, and that firm was closed down because of they claim that the firm is painting a pessimistic of the economy, and it has to shut down. So these are happening in both in China and in Hong Kong. But in the long run, many people think that as a financial center, we need to have this free flow of information. But this free flow of information is now also experiencing some sorts of self-censorship now.
So I want to actually get you so you are now I call you the professor of journalism, and because you both you're now teaching. I want to take a brief step back and say, again, this is not just protest news award, right? This is a human rights press awards. Why is it so unique and so important? I mean, this is an award that was very prestigious, that was very unique, not just in Hong Kong, but in the region and really internationally. What is the connection, and how should we think about human rights and press freedom from this experience?
Right. I mean, I would echo something that Steve said earlier, which is really worth thinking about, which is why the Human Rights Press Awards was held in Hong Kong in the first place. It wasn't so long ago that Hong Kong was regarded as a beacon for press freedom in Asia, right? And this is something that I think Hong Kongers were very proud of. We never had democracy, but if you asked Hong Kongers what made Hong Kong unique, what makes Hong Kong not just another city in China, they would point to the rule of law. They would point to an independent and free press. It's something that is totally entrenched as a core value in Hong Kong. And that is why Hong Kong was the locus for the Human Rights Press Awards, which, as Steve pointed out, this was not restricted to Hong Kong. These are awards honoring journalists and their work all over Asia, who work in very difficult conditions, who work, in places that are ruled by authoritarian governments in many instances, and are taking great risks. I think the connection between human rights and journalism is quite a clear one, because journalism exists to shine a light on things that people in power would rather you not know about and not see, right? And so journalism is a really important part of any open society and is a vital part of any democracy. And even though Hong Kong was not a democracy, it was a free society, it was an open society, and so it's very important. And so, it's really heartbreaking actually to watch Hong Kong's fall from, you know, being 18th in the world press freedom rankings to this latest 148. You know, it's heartbreaking is the only word I can use to describe that. You know, I do want to take this opportunity to say one thing though, because as you asked Yanwei and Gillian earlier, Samuel, you said, you know, what is the message we want to give to you know, the people, the journalists in Hong Kong who won those awards. And I think it's really, really important because a lot of people talk about the death of Hong Kong, the death of journalism in Hong Kong, the death of press freedom in Hong Kong. You know, how helpful is that? If you say something is dead, that's it, right? I mean, you know, you can hold an inquest into why it died, you can mourn its death, right? But it is pretty final, right? And, you know, I think and I'm sure Steve would agree because of what he said earlier, and definitely all the journalists who are still working in Hong Kong today, right? They are still producing journalism. It's not helpful to them for us to say, well, journalism's dead in Hong Kong or press freedom is dead in Hong Kong, right? They're still taking risks. They're still in the courts every day reporting on those trials. They're still submitting their copy. You know, their editors may, you know, edit them or whatever, but they are doing their best according to the same principles that they have always you know, used in order to report. So Hong Kong is a place that has a model of journalism that believes in verification, that believes in presenting facts, that believes in holding power to account, that believes in giving people a voice, right? That doesn't change, right? So the NSL is in place, so people know that they have to avoid these shifting red lines wherever they are. They know that there are certain things that will definitely get them in trouble, right? So they might, you know, try to avoid certain things, but the fundamentals of why they practice journalism and how they practice journalism, the fundamentals of that aren't going to change, right? And I think that the least we can do is to acknowledge that there are still people carrying out journalism, doing journalism every single day, that they're still doing it, and we you know, need to show our solidarity to them and say that we see your work, we see you, we acknowledge you, and we thank you for it.
I think that's a wonderful point. I saw and heard a number of commentators who said that, you know, this is exactly what the FCC in Hong Kong failed to do, right? Is to stand in solidarity with their own members and colleagues, which in a way, their suspension of the awards is a pronouncement that they have given up. And I think that that's why we're doing this today, is that we're not willing to just let it go. Steve or Chris, you have just recently been working in Hong Kong. What now, as we see the closing of the independent outlet? It's not just a loss for Hong Kong; it's a loss for the rest of the world. And the beacon of press freedom is now, you know, closing, at least in this moment. So how do we continue to push to get the stories and the news and the work that you was referring to that are still going on out of Hong Kong and through the barrier?
I think the good news is, first of all, what Ewan says, which is that there are people with considerable courage still within Hong Kong producing news. I don't think we should ever overlook that. But the really interesting thing is that we now have this enormous diaspora of reporters who used to work in Hong Kong, who are still intimately connected with people in Hong Kong. They're not on the ground, but they you know, the world has moved on. There's other ways of being in contact. And there are new news channels being established, which are providing vital information. There are organizations being formed to connect journalists from Hong Kong who are now overseas, who will provide a support group for these people and will provide a mechanism for sharing information. So, you know, as in all authoritarian societies, what you have is a migration of the resistance to oppression from the very dangerous situation of being on the ground to a lot of it taking place overseas. This is not satisfactory. Of course it's not satisfactory. Nothing is satisfactory about what's going on at the moment. But, you know, it means that that however severe the regime is, however repressive it is, however determined it is to prevent information from coming out, it's a tide and they can't stop it.
I just have one quick point. Like Yun said, there are still a lot of people, journalists working in Hong Kong. I spoke to one journalist and he said, oh, people should click more into the links, not just read on Facebook, on Twitter, on social media, and that. Click into the link, read the story, share it, and donate, subscribe to the media. Just 2 months ago, in media, 獨立媒體 in Hong Kong said that they achieved break even. Hong Kong feature media doing feature pieces try to fundraise or get more subscribers to sustain its survival. It reached the amount of subscribers they needed within 1 week. So with all the independent media outlets gone, but there are still some, and people should keep on supporting them with whatever way, by just clicking a link, by sharing, by subscribing and donating to them. There's a lot that we can do.
Well, I'm going to give Qingzheng and Yun your very last words here. I've been told that I'm over time here, but your final thoughts.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I hope we should all brave the storm and fight to the very end. I think every journalist should be true to the facts, true to our own conscience, and true to history. We should all be aware of our role as witness of history and preserver of historical data. So what we write today will become precious historical record tomorrow. So I think our job is to persevere, to fight to the very end. And I hope every journalist in Hong Kong would strive to this very aim.
Thank you for that. I mean, I kind of feel a bit put on the spot now. I would say, I think, journalism will find a way, right? Journalists in mainland China have had it much harder than we in Hong Kong had for a very, very long time. And, you see so many great investigative journalists in mainland China who have left journalism. And you would think that it's all over. And yet, look what happened at the beginning of COVID in Wuhan, when there was that window and the amazing reporting that, reporters from Citing and these independent reporters as well, coming out from the ground in Wuhan in that tiny window. So even in such inhospitable circumstances, great journalism can be produced. I think journalism will always find a way. And I think, journalists and journalism is nothing without the readers and the audience. So it's not just about journalists, although, I'm a journalist and I teach journalism and it means a lot to me. And I still think it is and can be and should be a force for good. But we are nothing without our readers and our audience. So I would say to everybody, stand with the journalists, because the journalists stand with you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Chris, Cheng, and Yun, and for joining us. We're grateful for both your perspective, but I think what you bring is this deep understanding, but also love for the journalism in Hong Kong and in the region, and I think it shows. So thank you so much. And I want to shift gear, Julian. I think a few of our speakers have already talked about this. That Hong Kong, this award is not just about Hong Kong. It covers the region and the best of human rights reporting in the region. you have actually written and have traveled. I think you're have been to Ukraine recently and are doing that. And we understand that, you know, Hong Kong is one setting where journalism is being done under extreme challenging circumstances and conditions. So we're going to bring on our next guest here, who reported and are still helping to report from Myanmar, especially in the aftermath of the coup. Uh, what was your experience being on the ground, and what does it mean to actually report from the ground when you're in an environment like Myanmar?
Sorry, are you asking me?
Yeah.
So I haven't reported from Myanmar, but I will say that I think there's a real value to going to these places and seeing firsthand. And I think if we're talking about Hong Kong in particular, mainland China in particular, we see how authorities try to control the narrative and to dominate it. And so part of seeking that truth is going to the places where things are actually unfolding, seeing with our own eyes, talking to people and hearing those first-person eyewitness accounts, and helping our readers understand a really complicated dynamic situation. So I think in places like Myanmar, in places like Afghanistan, in places like Ukraine right now, it's really important to see that for yourself and to tell the story firsthand. You know, I'll also just say, I think that the story in Hong Kong in some ways mirrors the story in Ukraine, and that we're seeing authoritarianism on the rise around the world, becoming more and more assertive. You know, Francis Fukuyama wrote about the end of history and this aspiration that democracies would take over. I think we see authoritarians pushing back against that narrative right now and offering an alternative vision for what humanity and what governance will look like. And it's really important to have journalists going to those places and reporting on it to see if it's actually what is being told in the public and to push back on some of that.
So again, for those of you who are just joining, we have all the winners and merit awards and merits winner of the Human Rights Press Award this year on our webpage. The link is in the chat and posted on screen here. And I think that's one of the most striking as we watch reports coming from Ukraine in most recent days. And I think sorry, I didn't mean to say that you were in Myanmar. I think you were going to Ukraine or have been in Ukraine. So two of the winners and merit mentions this year for the Human Rights Press Awards are Danny Fenster and Andrew Leckhamson, both of whom I see they look. I think they both reported Myanmar, so they're looking like each other on screen as well. And Andrew, who won actually the prize for feature writing, and in both of your pieces in Washington Post and Foreign Policy, documents really the first few the moments of the coup and the protests in response, and then the crackdown. And then Danny, who and the team at Frontier Myanmar, who I think have become sort of the lifeline of informations and news during this past year and a half. You one in your reporting and documenting of the specific crackdowns and really the situation that are faced by everyday people in Myanmar in the aftermath of the coup. And you yourself then became the first and the only foreign journalist who was arrested, detained, you were tried, sentenced to 11 years in jail for threatening essentially state national security. And you were then released in last November under quote unquote humanitarian consideration and reasons. So it's great to have both of you. And I'm going to actually start with Danny because I want you to just maybe take us with you, those of you who have never been on the ground reporting in this kind of situation. What was your experience being on the ground?
Well, I mean, first, it really, I think the people who did most of the work, and certainly in terms of the reporting that are behind these merit mentions and these awards are our reporters. I mean, I was an editor, and a lot of that is largely desk work. Early on, when the protests against the military regime began, you know, we were all kind of out in the streets monitoring and documenting and talking to folks. And I mean, I think you guys watched from abroad as sort of the repression on those protests started getting increasingly dangerous. So we were just kind of monitoring it, and we were really trying to follow the lead of what our reporters felt comfortable doing. And they were extremely eager to stay out there as long as they can. One of the reports I think that you guys highlighted is like a first-person account from one of our reporters, a photojournalist. So you know, it's just constantly staying in contact with our reporters and trying to ensure their safety as much as we could. Which was also a challenge because the regime had continually been shutting down internet and mobile internet access. Communication became a huge problem throughout the entire thing. We actually started at a certain point. We switched into a live blogging mode, which for us, we had done that during the 2020 election. We had a little bit of experience, but our bread and butter, I mean, we're a magazine. We do really long form features that take more time to craft and to really draw out story, narrative, detail. And, you know, we kind of had to flip into like a breaking news, almost wire service. And it was a challenge, but I mean, it's exactly why we're all there. And I think we all knew that, and we felt that mission pretty strongly.
Andrew, you congratulations, as I always said, reportedly winning, and so we're now officially naming you the winner. And you also work with the team at Frontier as well, but you also wrote your pieces for Washington Post and Foreign Policy. Tell us about writing these pieces and reporting from where you were.
Yeah. So right now I'm the digital editor for Frontier, but when the coup happened, I was in charge of our newsletters. So unlike Danny, who is kind of behind the desk editing every article that was coming in, I had a bit more free time and a bit more leeway to be freelancing on the side. So I was going to the protests as often as I could and writing these freelance stories. And I think really the two stories that were selected for this, the Washington Post story and the Foreign Policy story, those were kind of the stories where things turned. Because the first couple weeks in Yangon, there wasn't really any violence against the protesters. So you were seeing, you know, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, the biggest crowds I've ever seen anywhere in my entire life, choking every single major road all over Yangon. And the police and soldiers were pretty much just letting it happen. And, you know, there was a space for the press to go where we were taking pictures. We were going right up to police and soldiers, taking pictures of them. And that was totally fine and allowed and everything. And then towards the end of February, it just kind of flipped like a switch. And I always say, like, the protesters weren't doing anything differently. There was no additional threat. Everyone was still being completely peaceful. And all of a sudden, the police and soldiers just started shooting. They started with rubber bullets and stun grenades and tear gas. And very quickly, it was only like maybe 2 days of that non-lethal violence before it switched to live rounds. So that Washington Post article was the first protest crackdown where they just started shooting people in Yangon, because there had been a couple crackdowns in other places before that. And very quickly, I realized that being a journalist was also just no longer meant anything. So I'm with like a group of protesters, and they're, you know, protesting, and the police just start shooting stun grenades, or like, we don't even really know what they were shooting, because all of a sudden we're turning and running. And now I'm just sprinting away with the protesters. Somebody grabs me and pulls me into a shop front, and they pull down the metal gate, and we all hide there for like 10 minutes until the police go away. And this is the type of stuff that was happening over and over again. So then the foreign policy article was about the way that the protesters started to adjust to these crackdowns. And it was kind of more orchestrated things like that. So they'd have kind of intentional things set up to slow down the police and soldiers. And then they'd take advantage of those delays, scatter, take shelter with their neighbors, because everybody, 90%, maybe even more of the people that you met in Yangon were in support of the protests. So you could go into anybody's house and hide, and they'd hold you there. And then when the police and soldiers left, they'd all come out and start protesting again. And that lasted for a while, but eventually the death toll has just kind of kept getting higher and higher and higher. And one of those stories that Frontier was recognized for was the Long Taya massacre, where over 65 people were killed, and that was one of the real turning points where people kind of realized that that it wasn't sustainable, and you had a lot of people who kind of stopped protesting, but then you also had a lot of people who thought, okay, well, if we can't protest, then we're going to turn to armed revolution in self-defense, and that's where we are today.
I want to ask both of you a question. I know when you're doing foreign correspondence like this, the journalist is taking a lot of risks going out and doing it, but often you have locals who are supporting you, fixers, translators, sources that are going out on a limb to help make sure that you can tell the story. And I just wondered, as you're receiving that honor, can you speak a little bit without getting into trouble, the people who helped you?
For Frontier, the magazine, our reporting staff is basically entirely local. So there's less of a need, I think, for fixers. These are folks that have worked in the local newspaper scene for a long time, so they've developed sources on the certain beats that they cover. There are people that tend to cover border trade issues, people that are very well engaged in Yangon politics or national politics. So they have their sources. But that's our team, and we're very, very careful about the sort of reporting, the methods of reporting that we'll, that we feel comfortable with them doing. It's a conversation, so it's about how comfortable different reporters are. But we had 0 reporters arrested. I was arrested. That, I think, from my understanding, is it has to do with an affiliation with a previous news outlet. I would say, Sam, I appreciate the comment that Frontier had become sort of a lifeline for news, since which I think is certainly true. There are other outlets that are doing a lot of really good work and continuing to cover the country. Frontier has always had a focus on English language output. So that's sort of why we became a bit more prominent in terms of international readers. But there's a lot of really good outlets that are still reporting on the country in Myanmar language and some in English as well. But anyway, yeah, so at Frontier, that dynamic is a little bit different. Yeah. When you're an editor at one of these outlets, I think our mission as these foreign editors with English language skills and access to foreign readers is to help the locals tell their own story. And I had found a lot of meaning in that, and so that was kind of the role I was playing. I doubt that they were often hiring too many fixers.
Andrew, any last words from you?
Yeah. So just to touch on that, because I was freelancing for international news outlets, it was, a little different for me. And I had a translator who helped me with both of those stories, who obviously could not and did not want to be named, but neither of those stories would have happened without them. So they obviously deserve a ton of credit, which unfortunately they probably won't be able to get for at least, a while. And then just kind of touching in general on that question, winning an award like this is great. And, if you had asked me 2 years ago if I would be really excited to win an award like this, I would have said, obviously, to be on the front page of the Washington Post would have been like a dream of mine a couple of years ago. But when you go through something like this, it doesn't feel worth it. I think, a lot of young journalists probably feel like crisis reporting is exciting and interesting. And when you're living through it, it doesn't feel like any of that. You give it all away in a heartbeat just to make things go away, because you're just literally watching a country collapse. You're watching all the people who you've come to care about have their lives just utterly destroyed. So yeah, I mean, I think that is something that is very important to keep in mind.
Thank you to both of you. Again, congratulations to you, but also to the team of people around you. I do want to note that both of you mentioned this. On the webpage displays in the chat, we have some of the photos from the anonymous photographer who was also recognized by the Human Rights Press Award. And I saw that the Pulitzer also recognized yesterday a unnamed photographer and photographers on the ground for the safety. Their name were not displayed, but they also were recognized by the Pulitzer. So I think that your point is well taken. Thank you to both of you, and we hope that we'll continue to hear and see through your eyes and your reporting.
Thank you.
So I think, Julian, there's interesting to me that there seems to be this theme of like us conditions, maybe political, economic, or social, have deteriorated in some of these countries. It actually gave rise to the talent and to the profession for people to actually step up and become even more vigorous and effective in their craft. That happened in Hong Kong, and it seems like it's happening in other places.
Yeah, it sure makes it more dangerous, though. And I'd just like to point out, too, when we're talking about the relevance of the Hong Kong Free Press Awards at Foreign Correspondents Club, I do think that one thing we should really be paying attention to, if the Chinese government is making these extraterritorial claims about its ability to police, censor, and shut down speech abroad. And that's something that we've seen recently with, for example, Hong Kong Watch in the UK, them going after their website, demanding that they take it down. So I think that journalists are certainly adapting to the situation, adapting to peril, adapting to maybe not being able to cover their story from the front line or from places that are completely repressed, where they're unable to get in. But there's also dynamism and a sinister creativity happening on the other side to threaten press freedom. And I think that's something we need to be really cautious about.
So I'm going to welcome in our next guest, Tahil Isgil. Is a noted, well-known poet and filmmaker. He's joining us along with his daughter, who's going to help translate for him. But Tahir was the author of one of the merit winner in explanatory feature writing for this year's Human Rights Press Award. And his story captures, it's titled "One by One, They Took My Friends. They Sent My Friends to the Camps." And the link, again, is on the webpage on our website. You can also link it from The Atlantic. Tahir, thank you so much for joining us, for being with us.
Мен өзімніңке бұл палетке бүгінгі палет қатқашқалымдан қош болдым. Рахмет.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that I'm also a part of this event. Thank you.
So, I think I would just want to ask you to talk a little bit about the process of writing this story and writing essentially about your own life in the piece.
өзіңіздің мақал жазғаныңызды, қандай жазғаныңызды, өзіңіздің аят көтермеш қандай кіргізген түсініп беріңіз.
Бұл біздіңки ұйғырларныңки Шарқи Түркістанда болып атқан ахвалларны нұрғын адам білуді, нұрғынлыған ақпарат васыттырымы бұл ақта хабарларын ішледі.
Many people knows what's going on in East Turkestan, the Uyghur region, and many media outlets also had a lot of news and articles about the situation.
Lekin özünün keçirmişleri arqılıq, ailesinin keçirmişleri arqılıq bulup ötken işlerini bir hikaye şekilde bayan kıldığın işler pek cık emas.
But there are not a lot of stories that are from the people who experienced the thing and the story of the families and the individuals who actually experience the situation.
Kechiring. Meningki aslida bu chet elga chiqib yashash oilam bilan unda planimiz yo'q edi. Ammo 2016-yilning oxirida boshlangan Uyg'ur rayonidagi keng ko'lamlik tutqun meni oilam bilan yenib chiqishga, yo mandaqcha aytganda qechib chiqishga majbur qildi.
Originally, my family and we didn't have plans of going out to foreign country and start a new life here. But after the mass arresting starting from the late 2016 forced us to escape to another country and live here.
Endi bu jarayonda nurg'unlagan voqealar yuz berdi, nurg'unlagan ishlarni boshdan kechirdik shu yenib chiqish jarayonida.
During the process, we experienced a lot and a lot of things happened to us.
Anadan keyin mening yaqin do'stlarimningki ular ba'zilari shoir, yozuvchi, artist, san'atkor. Bularningki men shu yenib chiqishning oldi keynida, yenib chiqayotgan mezgilda orqadan qo'lga olinganligini o'z ko'zim bilan o'zim bevosita ko'rdim, uningga shohid bo'ldim.
A lot of my friends, including poets, writers, artists, I saw them, I witnessed them being taken away to camps before and after I escaped from China.
Pasportlarni tatib olgan ahvol ostida munoyat zo'r qiyinchilik yo'liqdik. Anadan keyin oila bo'yicha yenib chiqish butkul bizningki shu jarayonimiz nihoyatda bir agir to'qay bir jarayon bo'ldi.
We faced a lot of difficulties before we escaped because the government took our passports away, and the process of taking the passports back, taking the visa, all of those are really difficult for us.
Amerikaga qaytib kelgandan keyin dastlabda biz turmushni yangidan boshlashga majbur bo'ldik.
After we escaped to the US, so first of all, we were forced to start a new life here and start all over again.
Bu biz uchun bir qadar osonga to'xtamadi, chunki bizda unda tayyorlik yo'q edi bu yerga chiqish.
It wasn't easy for us too because we didn't have a plan of doing this at all.
Shunga men dastlabda jiq bir narsa yozmadim. Asosligi matbuotlarning ziyoratini qabul qilib, u yerda bo'layotgan ishlarni bayon qilib berdim, o'zimning kechirmishlarimni.
So at the beginning, I didn't write a lot about the experience, but I received interviews from different medias and talked about what happened.
Xabarlar ishlandi, men to'g'riliq, ba'zi hujjatli filmlar ishlandi. Bir turkum mening hikoyalarim kitoblarga kirgizildi.
There were news about my story, there were documentaries, and there are also books that are included my stories in there.
Lekin o'tgan yili 2021ga kelgan chog'da ba'zi medialar, ba'zi jurnallar meningki o'zimning kechirmishlarimni bir hikoyalarimni yozib berishni talab qildi. Shuning bilan men bir turkum hikoyalarni yozdim. Maqolalarni.
Yeah, but last year some medias they invited me to start writing about my story. So I wrote some stories and articles about my experience.
Andan keyin buni Joshua Freeman deydigan munavvar bir tarjimon, Princeton universitetiningki tarix o'qituvchisi Uyg'ur tilidan ingliz tiliga tarjima qildi. Shuning bilan bu Atlantikda e'lon qilindi bu maqola.
And a historian from the Princeton University called Joshua Freeman, also an awesome translator, he translated all my works from Uyghur to English.
Bu maqola shu Atlantikda e'lon qilingandan keyinmi nurg'un odam ko'rib ta'sirlanganligini aytdi.
After the article was published in the Atlantic, a lot of people reached out to me and told me how they were impressed by the article and felt the same as us.
Anadan keyin ham bu hikoya asosida men 2012 yildan tortib, ya'ni Xi Jinping taxtga chiqqandan tortib taki mush Amerika'da kelgichi bo'lgan jarayonlarni bir kitob qilib yozdim.
So based on this article, I wrote a book starting from 2013, where Xi Jinping started to be the president of China, to the whole process of escaping to US.
Bu kitap kelar yili 3-oyda 11 davlatda 10 xil tilda nashr qilindi.
And this book of mine is going to be published in 10 countries in 11 languages next year, starting at March.
That's fantastic. Well, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is I know as Uyghurs have been more open about speaking out against the repression, that the Chinese government has grown more assertive in trying to silence them abroad. So I wanted to hear a little bit about the response to this. I know in the US and in the foreign press, you're getting this award. It's been largely positive. But have there been any efforts to silence or to intimidate you from speaking out going forward?
Mesela Uygurlar özünki hikayesi sözleşkenden artıp çetel devletlerde. Lekin sizni mesela bir kuş sizni to'xtatib baqqanmi bu xil so'zlashdan hikoyalarni so'zlashdan?
Albatta, men dastlabda Amerikaga kelgandan keyin 2017-yili 11-oylarda Wall Street jurnalga intervyu berdim. Ayolim ikkimiz bo'layotgan ishlarni Uyg'urlarga qaratilgan cho'ng tutqun irqiy qirg'inchilikni so'zildik.
Of course, in November of 2017, me and my wife, we gave an interview for the Wall Street Journal.
Ondan keyin 2018 keyin yana bir necha axborot o'rinlari medialar meni ziyorat qildi.
And followed by that, there's a couple of news medias that also interviewed me.
Shu chog'da Jungoning saqchilari meningki ayolimninki WeChat orqali bizga message uchur yo'lladi. Sening yo'ldashing bunday ishlar aralashmasin, balki matbuotlarga xabar qilmasin, undan keyin Amerikaning hukumat taraf uyushtirgan faoliyatlarga qatnashmasin deb.
Right after that, the Chinese police officers, they reached out my wife through her WeChat, and they basically told us to stop giving interviews to medias and stop working with government and basically just be silent.
Lekin biz endi buningdan qo'rqib qolmadik, ham so'zlashni davomlashtirib chunki bizning so'zliginimiz rost, biz bo'layotgan ishlarni so'zildik. Shunga yana biz davomlashtirib bu ishlarni.
But we didn't frighten up by this. We continued talking about what's happening, and we continued sharing our experiences because we believe that what we're talking about is truth, and truth should be told.
Shu jarayonda hamda meningki ayolim bilan ikkimizningki oilasidan 6 odamni kampga akirib ketdi. Endi bu ishningki bizningki bu yerda matbuot so'zligimiz bilan munosabatlikmi emasmi biz uni uqmaymiz.
And after that, 6 people in both me and my wife's family were taken to the camps, and we're not sure if it's related to our interviews here.
Thank you here, and I think that's partly where the same concept I think Steve and Yoon have brought up, and then Julian you have talked about, which is, they don't tell you where the red line is; they just point it to you. And on top of that, they also create this atmosphere of the gray area of, you might be physically, like you said, outside of Hong Kong, but we can still get to you, and you don't know the ways in which that we can take control and silence, individuals as well as media by the threat that they are posing sort of over you.
Şu Hong Kong'un sırtında bolsunmu sana bir xil arxil vasıtalar bilan seni qo'rqitish yo'li bor bilanki dedi.
Shundoq. Bularning har xil choralari bor. Sosyal medialar orqali tahdid soladi. Bizningki u yerda qolib qolgan urug' tuqqanlarimizni go'ro'ga ilishni tahdid soladi bizga. Agar sen u yerda manda faoliyatni qilsang yoki medialarga maqola yozsang, sening ota-onang va urug' tuqqanlaringga yaxshi bo'lmaydi deb gapni silib qiladi, ammo bu bir xil tahdid shaklida shunda bizga u uchur keladi.
Right. They will threaten us. They have multiple ways of threatening, and one of which is to threaten us by telling us that our relatives back in China will be arrested if we talk to medias and share our experience. That is, they do it smoothly, but the threat is real there.
Well, thank you again to hear for joining us. Thank you for writing your story. We're looking forward to your book coming out, and please do make sure that you share with us. We'll share with our members and audience, and as you continue to tell the story. Thank you so much.
Rahmat Tahir, sizning kitobingizni kelishini qarshi olamiz. Rahmat.
Rahmat aytaman sizlarga.
Thank you all too.
Well, so Jillian, and there's not, I think a lot of the times what I hear from people is that, they lament the fact that something, an issue or region like Hong Kong or the Uyghurs or, Myanmar, they're off people's, they're not in people's consciousness anymore because they're off the headlines. So we have this sort of relationship, right, to news media sort of driving in a way, people are saying that, well, we only care about what's going on in this place if it is in the front page. I think what struck me is so many of the stories, and I think many of the guests have already commented on this, is that it's not about the breaking news or tweet. It's all the journalism that goes into months and months and tens of people working on those stories to be able to produce the truth and the narrative.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's nice to get a front page, but I think the deep dives that some of our award winners have done are truly remarkable. And it's up against authoritarian governments that would prefer to see them silenced. In Hong Kong, they've thrown people in jail. They would prefer to have them forgotten. And I think all of these people receiving these awards have really shown the perseverance to put this on the record, to stay focused on something. And that helps the American public and the public around the world continue to care about it.
I want to welcome our next winner for this year's Human Rights Press Award is Calista Weinenberg from Dateline SBS, all the way in Australia. I actually know that you're in the US now, but you were in Australia when you worked on this story. First of all, I just want to congratulate you and your team. This was not a easy or in any way simple task of putting together the documentary of Escape from Afghanistan. So congratulations.
Thank you so much, Samuel. And now it's an extraordinary honor to receive this acknowledgement, and also, to be able to elevate the story in the film to potentially a more global audience. It really wasn't an easy film to make. I don't know if the people that have watched it, I mean, it was made, the context in which it was made was not only what was happening internally inside Afghanistan and the complications around filming in that country alone, but in Australia at the time, it was actually COVID and all of Australia was in lockdown. So I was in lockdown in Australia in my, house, trying to make this, so it was many hands, many different contributors from all parts of Australia, different camera producers, different producers working alongside me. Jordan Bryan, the incredible Australian filmmaker who is based full-time in Kabul, working freelance, like so many people in this day and age. So it was a really collaborative film, and like you said, enormous difficulties on multiple levels, both because of the dynamic security situation inside of Afghanistan, but also the global pandemic, which just from a filmmaking perspective poses so many obstacles these days.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit. One of the things that's really interesting to me about doing this kind of reporting in a very technologically connected era is you keep in touch with your sources. You end up following them on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, and the story continues even after your work is finished. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. What has life been like for them since the completion of this film?
I mean, one of our contributors, Tim, who managed to make it out of Afghanistan, he remains in the UK and is still navigating that kind of resettlement process, and also, still exploring and hopeful of making it to Australia and navigating what is now a humanitarian visa process here, a never-ending bureaucratic process is basically what these two people face. Wahab, the barber and another contractor who worked for the Australian Defence Force, he remains still to this day inside Afghanistan, is still trying to make it out with his family. Again, he's in a more difficult situation to Tim. He's hopeful to navigate this humanitarian visa process, but it's a minefield, and it's still, it's difficult for them alone, but then even as an Australian journalist trying to understand this bureaucratic process that has been put in place by Home Affairs in the Australian government is extraordinarily difficult to comprehend and work through, even as an Australian who kind of speaks the same language, and understands the layers of bureaucracy involved. So, Wahab is still navigating that. He's still in the country, still poses, still has significant threats posed to his life and family. And like so many other Afghans, is now navigating a new world under the Taliban.
So I just want to remind everybody that the full film, the documentary "Escape from Afghanistan," is actually on the link. You can search for it on Google. It's on YouTube. It's also on their website. We have a link to it on the webpage that you see on the banner and in the chats here. I want to bring a new friend and someone who I have great admiration for, Najiba Ayubi, who is an Afghan reporter journalist. She has been recognized internationally for her work, and she's now the managing director of the Khalid Group, which I am so glad to have you come on to share some of your thoughts. Najiba, thank you so much.
Thank you, Samuel, and hello to all our friends here. And thank you for making this opportunity. I think generally that journalism work has become difficult in different parts of the world, especially for Afghan people. Right now, we have the most difficult time of our history. Like example, I can tell you in all the world, you cannot find some places which girls cannot go to school. Afghanistan is the only place. During the years, we got a lot, we achieved a lot. Like example, we had a very good constitution, we had a very good media law, we had a very good access to information law. We fight for all of these. We learned together during 20 years, and then we implemented these ideas and we made these laws and mechanism and different platforms, everything. But all these things was destroyed during 1 or 2 hours. It is political effect on our people that every 20 or 25 years it is repeating. It is 44 years we are spending in the war. It is not easy for a nation to spend 2 generations, or now it is that the third generation is coming, but war is still there. I was in 6th grade of school when war started in my country. Now I'm getting old, and I spent all my age in the war. The meaning of these years, understanding of the means of this kind of life is only possible for the people that they spend their life in the war. I remember 10 years from 2010, 11 years from 2010 until till 2021 August, which I come out from Afghanistan. I and my friends, all journalists, live under a lot of pressure. How kind of pressure? Because every second it was possible to attack happen on us. When I went out from house in the morning, I didn't think, never. I had no hope to come back at the evening. I think today is my turn, because every day we lost our colleagues in different part of the city and the country. And during this 21 years or 20 years, we have lost 176 journalists. It was not only national journalists. It was national journalists and international journalists. We lost our international friends as well. And then we lost a number of women journalists during these years. It means we are respecting, we love the freedom. The Afghan people love freedom. Afghan people like the freedom of expression. The media was the most trusted sources for Afghan people, because always when they were hopeless from the government, they were hopeless from the attacks of the oppositions or the Taliban or Daesh or any others, they come to the media and talk with the media, and they forwarded all things they had in their heart. Now, this tools is also limited for them, and they cannot have their voices in the media because Taliban put a lot of pressure on them. They put a lot of limitation on the journalists and all the people. A number of incidents, very negative things happen in different parts of country, but no report from that. Why? We don't have reporter in different part of country anymore because more than 7,000 journalists left the country because of this 15th of August, which happened, and Taliban took the power in Afghanistan. People had experience of the past time of Taliban won in 20 years back. A lot of people in the first days, they tried to go out from Afghanistan. And also US and other countries was help them to evacuate them to other countries because we had not a good memory from the past. Then there is a number of media still they are working in Afghanistan, but the quality of the work is not like we had before 15th of August. Why? Because they are under censorship of the government, and also they are doing self-censorship.
Yeah.
Why they are doing self-censorship? Because there is no mechanism for protection of the journalists. And if they kill the journalists, if they arrest the journalists, if they put them in jail, nobody can defend from there.
Yeah.
There is no mechanism. All these things made a difficult life for the Afghan people and difficult situation for Afghan media colleagues.
Cal, let me come back to you just for your final thought here. I'm struck by the fact that we're I think in a time where not just a reporting process, not just the people who are directly involved in the project, but the distribution of the story, of the film, of the whatever media piece you also have these ramifications that we might not have previously and before this connected world worry about. I noted in the beginning of this event that none of the journalists in Hong Kong who are currently there, who wants to go back there, who have families there, can even appear publicly to talk about their story. And then the people who are featured in those stories are actually being targeted. So I guess I want to see if you have any comments just about that ripple effects in terms of what producing the story, but really even just sharing the stories now has.
Yeah, I mean, sharing the story, it is always a double-edged sword, right? I mean, you want it to get out to as many people as possible so that you can raise awareness around the issues and the problems that, your story is focusing on. But there are severe safety consequences for the contributors many times and the people that have been featured in the film. And so it's a very difficult conversation to have with someone. And a lot of the time, the people that take the risk in speaking and being involved in the film, I mean, you are engaged in that conversation. Where are you happy for this to be shared afterwards? What could the consequences be? And I mean, for our contributors, the fact that one of our contributors is still inside of Afghanistan, I mean, there is a significant risk to him still in this film, being shared. So you do have to weigh up the risks. And I mean, he was very adamant that he thought it would be in his best interest for his story, obviously, to be aired. I mean, to help his case and bring attention to it, which is why he ultimately decided to be in the film. But yeah, I mean, sharing the story and where it's available in the world, I mean, we do try to take steps to limit who can access it. And I mean, there's only you can only do that to a certain extent. You can't. It's not always a 100% guarantee, but yeah, you do have to take precautions in how you share it, where you share it, and you know, involve your contributors in that conversation and see what they're comfortable with. I mean, it's never. It's a gray zone that you just both try to navigate. And social media is then another world. Like, stories can get picked up again and just spread. And, you know, sometimes it's a scene that you maybe never thought twice about, and then all of a sudden someone watches it, clips it up and shares it themselves, and it's off. So, I mean, it is difficult to control. It's a big question that you have to work through, but as long as you are kind of transparent, I think, with your contributors around the fact that you can't give them a 100% guarantee and that they are willing, you know, they understand the risks, I think that's all you can really do. And then hope that, you know, by telling their stories, that there is some sort of positive outcome for them, and that it does actually help them.
Well, again, I want to congratulate you and your team. I think your story, I think, capture, you know, the real sort of life individual experience of Afghans who, as you said, some of them are still there and facing an unknown future, and being able to tell their story, and then for you to be able to put that out, I think is incredibly powerful. And Najiba, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing about, you know, your long-standing work as a journalist, as a woman journalist, even prior to this past year, and what the devastation now on the ground means for those who are working, as you said, walking out, believing that they might not and probably will not come back. Thank you for those of you, and I want to thank everybody. Julian, I think there are obviously some common themes that were very much connected from beginning to end, I think, of our conversation today. About the way in which that journalism has been impacted with unrest and with crackdowns of both political and military, and also just the response and of what it means to report in that environment. Any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, well, I think we're living through a really dark time right now. We see authoritarianism on the rise. We see threats to freedom around the world. But I think today's been really good in acknowledging excellent work that took a lot of courage. And, you know, courage is contagious. Courage inspires courage. So I think that in itself is cause for hope. I guess just further, you know, reading up on phenomenal foreign correspondents in the last year, one thing that struck me is the rage of Martha Gellhorn and how furious she was at injustice. Journalism is limited in its capacity to address that, but I think what we can do, and what our award recipients certainly have done, is put it on the record. This is the first draft of history. These authoritarians are in it for themselves. They're in it for selfish reasons, for self-glorifying reasons. And when we write this, we challenge their legacy in history. We put it on the record. We affect that reputation. And we make sure that they are remembered for the injustices that they commit. And that is something that I think is critical for future generations and critical for, hopefully, history not repeating itself.
Thank you for that, Julian. And we're coming to the end of, and I want to close with a quick thought, and then I want to read something from anonymous reporters in Hong Kong who, some of them are the winners who cannot come on and join us to talk about their work and their reports. But before that, I want to say that we wanted to put this year's awards on the record, as Julian talked about, because it is part of history. It is the first draft, and we want to be able to share. That's why we posted all the links to the winners this year on our webpage, even those outlets that have been taken down and shuttered. We found backup copies, and I want to thank all the anonymous people out there who are doing recording backups, who are spreading and sharing the archive, and then translating many of these stories from its original language into English or other language so that it could be shared more broadly. I want to thank all of you for your work. I know that none of you can show your face and be recognized publicly, but I want to acknowledge the work that you've done. Again, we have gathered today. Thank you for spending a chunk of time with us today in honor of the 2022 Human Rights Press Awards. All the winners are listed on the webpage. It goes from documentary film to short film to investigative pieces like we talked about that tons and tons of people worked on over months and months of times. Those people, those talent, I think, are still there and committed, many of them working under the shadow and the risk. So I want to close by reading a comment from an anonymous reporters that are one of the winners of this year's who can't join us themselves. Here's what they wanted to say. Thank you to the Press Freedom Committee members who resigned. Thank you to Samuel, to the Campaign of Hong Kong. As one of the reported winners, I represent my team to share some brief remarks anonymously. I suppose all of us know that every year when we sign up for the competition and send the entries to the online system, we are all clearly indicating the connections of our entry, the story that we're submitting, to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So before today's event, I visited the Human Rights Press Awards website, and again, it still claims on their website that the goal is to increase respect for people's human rights and focusing attention on those threats to those freedoms. The awards, in the words of the FCC, which are now in their 25th years, are organized by the FCC of Hong Kong. It is ironic, of course, that I read it again before this ceremony. Regrettably, however, me and my team members somehow had won the press awards, but none of us could predict under the national security law that we can only give remarks anonymously. Compared to the awards, much more importantly, of course, is the truth and the facts being revealed. Thank you to our sources, to the interviewees, that really, it is really sad we could not even mention their name now. Under the national security law, they were brave enough to be interviewed. Journalism, of course, is not a crime. Nonetheless, while a common sense is being repeatedly mentioned and checked, a certain society has been damaged and distorted severely. The environment is getting deteriorated. However, we will keep writing as a manner to record and to resist. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to keep those words alive, along with the winners and the honorees and the history of this awards. I am just so moved, and I think it testified to what every guest have said today, of the importance of the critical work. And these are the words that we'll end today's event with. We will keep writing as a manner to record and resist. Thank you so much. Thank you, Julian, for joining us, and thank you for everybody who viewed us. And we'll have this recording up in our various platforms. Hopefully that it will be something that people can view, especially those who are in Hong Kong who might not be able to join us otherwise.
Thank you.
Thank you.